to each one of us 1 second after death. This is the opening statement in the article in our study Bible. And it is interesting how this, I think that's a true statement. There are times when what? We do not think of the hereafter, and we may think that we are eternal here on earth, but then things do happen. Last week was just a horrendous week for air travel, and those who have ever traveled by airplane, what is your general thought when you're coming into a landing? And they say you're coming into Fayetteville, you're coming into RDU or wherever. What's your general thought? But depending on if that's your final destination, you say, well, I'll pick up my bags, I'll be able to get home. If you're going to a connecting flight, it's how much time do I have to get to my connecting flight? If you're flying international, coming in someplace, it's like, okay, I got to get through customs, and I got to go pick up my bag, and then I got to get my bag clear, and then I got to go to the next gate. Where's that? And of course, what happened Wednesday night for that flight coming out of Wichita? Would anybody on that plane have thought we're going to get hit by a helicopter? And think about the flight in Philadelphia on Friday night. What was that flight about? It was a medical flight returning to return a young girl who had had a procedure done that she couldn't get, that to help her, and it crashes. And like I said, we know that there are instances in our own families and our own situations that deal with this. 1 second after death, Brother Alan Hires, a longtime editor of the Spiritual Sword, had a sermon basically with the same title. His title was, What Happens 5 Minutes After Death? Time's a little different, but what's the idea? What is the afterlife? What happens? What do we know from the Bible with regard to the spiritual realm? Sometimes what do we hear about? I don't know, since I don't really watch the news very much, I don't broadcast news, I read, but I remember growing up, there was one young boy, I can't remember how long ago this was, I think it was in high school, junior high, middle school. He supposedly had died, but had come back, and supposedly he had walked toward the light, and then it pushed him back or something. And you hear those stories every once in a while, right? I was in heaven, but then I got sent back. Or I thought that these beings came, and, were they really dead? I don't know. I'm not making that comment. I will note, though, that do we not have instances in the New Testament, in the Old Testament, in fact, where people came back to life, were brought back to life? The one we think about, well, first of all, Christ, of course, but the first person we probably, if I said, tell me a person, not Christ, who was resurrected from the dead. Lazarus is the first one that comes through. He was 4 days dead. Now keep in mind, with Jewish time, that could be just part of a day, but he was in there at least 2 or 3 days, 24-hour period. He was to the point where his sister said, what? He stinketh, he's probably beginning to decay. And notice he rose from the grave. Jesus resurrected him. And what do we not find at all in the Bible, though? Where do they go? There was no account that says, well, Lazarus, what was it like? I don't know what he would be able to tell him. That's right. I don't know. I really don't know if he could tell him anything. But if he could, it's not recorded, is it? And I'll be honest, if somebody came back to, I'd say, whatever it's like. And or are you disappointed? The better question is, are you disappointed you came back? If you were in paradise, I don't know. But we also have Jairus' daughter, who, you remember when Jesus went in and said, she's sleeping. And the people who had been around her said, what? No, she's dead. But we have, what did you think, young lady? We had the Shunammite widow in 2 Kings, her son. Elisha brought her back. But we have no reference, do we, about what it's like, other than what is taught, whether through words like in the epistles or like what Jesus spoke. And the one passage, and it's really, they use it sort of as a foundation, they use it as a basis point, or a good part of this, or use it as a starting point for this article, is of course the story, the account of the rich man and Lazarus. And so this is found in Luke chapter 16, 19 through 31. And so before we begin our discussions, let's read this passage. That's Luke chapter 16, verse 19 through 31. There was a certain rich man who was clothed in purple and fine linen and fared sumptuously every day. But there was a certain beggar named Lazarus, full of sores, who was laid at his gate, desiring to be fed with the crumbs which fell from the rich man's table. Moreover, the dogs came and licked his sores. So it was that the beggar died and was carried by the angels to Abraham's bosom. The rich man also died and was buried. And being in torments, he lifted up his eyes and saw Abraham afar off and Lazarus in his bosom. Then he cries out, Father Abraham, have mercy on me. Send Lazarus that he may dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am tormented in this flame. But Abraham said, Son, remember that in your lifetime you received your good things, and likewise Lazarus evil things. But now he is comforted, and you are tormented. And besides all this, between us and you, there is a great gulf fixed, so that those who want to pass from here to you cannot, nor can those from there pass to us. Then he said, I beg you, therefore, Father, that you would send into my father's house. For I have 5 brothers, that he may testify to them, lest they also come to this place of torment. Abraham said to him, They have Moses and the prophets. Let them hear them. And he said, No, Father Abraham. But if one goes to them from the dead, they will repent. But he said to him, If they do not hear Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded, though one rise from the dead. And it's interesting to know that's how it ends. It ends at that point. So, let's look at this account. Yes? There are no such things as dumb questions.
The Lazarus that, what Mary's, whatever, and then the rich man and Lazarus. Is that the same Lazarus?
Now, that's what I'm calling a premature question.
Okay.
It's a premature question. Premature question. I will cover that. First question we want to ask, though, is this a parable? A parable. And some people say this account is just a parable. Some people say it is a real event. So, what is a parable? I love the EHT definition. That is correct. An earthly story with a heavenly meaning. I think that's a wonderful definition. So, the one thing we note is that it doesn't say, well, Jesus then got up and said, let me tell you a parable. Or, here's a parable of the rich man and Lazarus. But please note, when we look at other parables in the New Testament, that's not always the case either. If you look at the beginning of Luke chapter 16, in fact, in the same chapter, you'll find what our headers will generally say, the parable of the unjust steward or unjust servant. But Jesus doesn't necessarily say that. He doesn't say, here's a parable of the unjust steward. So he doesn't necessarily start his parables all the time saying, I've got a parable to tell you, or here's a parable, or I'm going to teach you in this parable. But what do his parables, when we consider the parables, what do they have in common? And we take that first part of the definition, they are earthly stories. Meaning what? What does that mean? They happen on earth. They could happen on earth. They could happen, we say, in real life. They are not fables. What is a fable? Well, it's called a made-up story, but what does it generally do? Aesop's fables, what's probably the most famous fable? Two insects. One ant and the grasshopper. You know, that's one of the, but there's a lot of other fables. What usually happens with a fable, what the definition of fable is, they generally take animal life, animals or plants, and they give them human characteristics. They give them human characteristics. There's actually a fable in the Old Testament in 2 Chronicles chapter 25, verse 18. Amaziah, who was king of Judah, was threatening to go up against the king of the nation of Israel, lead Judah up against Israel. The king of Israel, Joash, told a fable about a thistle threatening a big cedar tree. And they were talking and conversing like they were human beings. But do plants talk? Do trees talk? Do animals talk? I know Mr. Ed was a TV show, but that was just a TV show. And if you do have a talking dog, keep them safe, because that probably you might be able to make some money there. But animals don't talk. Plants don't talk. Plants don't engage in human activity. Plants don't either. They don't threaten other plants. So Jesus does not use fables, does he? His accounts deal with human beings engaged in real life situations. Then it's not mythology. Now, please note that I realize there's a lot of definitions, potential definitions for mythology, and even some people claim what with regard to the Bible. It is mythology as well. But when I think of this, and when I'm thinking of mythology, and I'm probably this is my specific thought process, is we're talking about those with amazing creatures and beings, and the Iliad is a wonderful epic poem, and I can't say that I've read all the way through, but when I was shopping at Christmas at Barnes & Nobles, I picked up a paperback copy, and maybe one day I'll read it, so it's in my possession. But in there you've got, they're going on some trip. And of course then you've got the sirens, and you've got all these mystical and magical beings involved. And then you got satyrs and centaurs and minotaurs and dryads and druids and nymphs and all these things. And then you've got all these various gods who engage in human bacteria. And then you've got a guy like Hercules who cleans out the Aegean stables by diverting a river by his bare hands, Does Jesus use that kind of, story? No. And please note, someone says, I got a King James Version. I think somewhere, it doesn't say unicorn. Please note, some of those definitions are using, like the King James, Those are the translations. That's not exactly what the word means. Look, Apologetics Press would be a good place to find articles talking about that. So then he doesn't speak in myths, he doesn't speak in fables. He, again, speaks in earthly stories that have a heavenly meaning. So when he talks about sowing the seed, a farmer is out in the field sowing seed. Makes perfect sense, doesn't it? The woman lost a coin. What did she do? She used her x-ray vision to try to find it. She lifted up the house in one hand and shook it, and then the coin fell out. What did she do? She did it the old-fashioned way, didn't she? She grabbed a broom and started sweeping and started looking. Even the story, for example, the prodigal son, let's use that. That's kind of a wild story. There's nothing magical and mystical there, is it? Not animals talking this. But is it possible that somebody in their lives, has it happened, where some son or daughter has hit rock bottom and done what? Gone back to their parents. Says, I'm at the rock bottom. Where I need to go, my parents may be able to help me. That's not an impossible story, is it? It happens. So these stories, these accounts of parables, have an earthly story, but what's the purpose? To have a heavenly meaning. So we're going back to sowing the seed, and someone says, well, that's preaching the Word of God. So does that mean we're supposed to take the Bibles and throw them out? No, that's talking about what? Teaching. Teaching. The prodigal son is about what? Reconciliation with God. Repentance and reconciling with God. One that was lost has come back. The vineyard men, the wicked husbandmen, what was the meaning there? That the Jews, that the kingdom was going to change, was it not? Those Jews were going to lose their place in that vineyard. They were going to be destroyed. And there were going to be new owners, or new stewards, or new servants. And while someone says, how heavenly is that? We're talking about the kingdom, are we not? The church. And what is the church? A spiritual body, is it not? So the parables that we see here, we talked about, and the others, have a meaning. What's different about this account? Well, there is an earthly part, is there not? We have a rich man, we have Lazarus, they live, then they die. But the second part of the account deals with what? Deals with things in that spiritual realm. That's not something we can observe on a daily basis, can we? I could go out in the field or go by and I'll see, well, today they don't go with hands, I'll use tractors and all this, but I can go see fields getting planted, can't you? I can see seeds being sowed. But can I see a conversation between two people in what is called Hades or paradise, and there's some invisible gulf between them, and they're talking, and there's a guy named Abraham? Can I see that? No. Can you see that? No. So that's not as observable. And so that leads it to this, maybe it is a real account. Let's see. Continuing on. One other thing that we find, if you'll look at all his other parables, or those things, those we call parables, what do those characters that are in there generally not have? Don't they have? Names. I can't tell you who those wicked husbandmen were, could you? The Good Samaritan, what was his name? The Levi who went by, the priest who went by, what were their names? That woman who lost the coin, what was her name? And yet this account, we do have a name. And actually, we have two names, don't we? First of all, I have Lazarus, a certain beggar named Lazarus. And then we also have Abraham. So now not only does this account have a person with a name, he also includes a biblical character, a biblical person, and allow me to say it this way, a biblical historical person in this scenario. So, that gives me possibly support this is not, maybe not a parable. In the long run, it doesn't matter necessarily, does it? As long as we understand what is Jesus trying then to teach, the consequences of life and what it will be like in the hereafter. He's also pointing out, we'll make a couple comments a little bit later, he's also pointing out there was probably some surprises. Probably the hearers were a little surprised, were they not, when they heard this parable or this account. So, we said there were two characters in the original account. At the beginning of the account, beginning of the story, the beginning of the account. Both these individuals were human beings. They were created, their origins came through Adam and Eve. Adam, who was created from the dust of the ground. Eve, who was created from the rib of Adam. But they maintain these same elements, do they not? That they are made up of the elements of the earth. And while created man has a number of characteristics or similarities to those in the animal kingdom, there are similarities in many cases. They have life. Dogs live, cats live, birds live, man lives. There is a difference, is there not? In that, what did God say, Genesis 1:26? Let us make man in our image. Now we go to John 4:24. If God is a spirit, then it can't be referring to our physical image, can it? It obviously has to refer to the spiritual image, the spiritual side, the spirit side, the soul side. And so we have been made over the animals. We have a different relationship with God because God breathed life into us and gave us a soul, gave us a spirit. Zechariah in Zechariah 12:1 said, God forms the spirit of man within him. We have something different. And so these are the type of men that we're talking about. These are human beings, created human beings. So the first one was a rich man. What do we know about this rich man? Just as a certain rich man. But what do we know about him? He was rich. How do we, they give some support. Well, you say he's rich. How do we know he's rich? He was clothed in purple and in fine linen. The linen, Sister Linda? And he fed sumptuously. So first of all, his clothing. Purple was a color of wealth. Lydia from Thyatira. That church was mentioned on, that city was mentioned on Sunday morning. She was a seller of purple. So she was selling garments, clothing to those who would be wealthy. The purple was a designation of wealth, showed a sign of wealth. This fine linen was, when I read a little bit, something similar to what might be like silk, the way it was done, but it wasn't silk, but it was another sign that this person had money. And then as Sister Linda points out, he fared sumptuously every day, meaning he ate. Is a good way. He ate sumptuously. He lived high on the hog. Might be a southern saying. He was well off. He was not worried about missing meals. And so this is the rich man in this story, this account. Obviously a wealthy man. So then we have a second person, and we'll try to drag this out so Katie will get back. If I fall on the floor, that's just a time waster. we'll make sure I explain, since you asked a question. So Lazarus, the name is actually, it's a Greek name. The Hebrew equivalent would have been Eleazar. And it means God has helped. Now think about that. What do we know about this Lazarus? He was not rich. In fact, it didn't even say, no, our English translations don't even say he went and sat at the gate. It says he was what? Laid at the gate. So what does that imply? He was a cripple. He was in bad health. He had to have help. I remember a number of years ago when the Braves were still playing at the old Fulton County Stadium, Turner Stadium, in the Olympics. But we were on a bus trip, and so we parked, and we had to come down this huge hill. And then we'd go underneath Interstate 85, 75 to get to the stadium. So you're walking down. And at the bottom, under the overpasses, there was this old gentleman in a rickety wheelchair. And all I could think of is he had help getting down there. Because he didn't come from the top of the hill down that wheelchair, because he probably would have been sprawled out on the pavement. Somebody had to help him to get down there. Well, it appears probably somebody had helped Lazarus get down here. It said he was full of sores. Full of sores. So again, that designates that he was not healthy. Why was he at the gate of the rich man? He was willing. He only wanted, it doesn't appear he wanted to sit down at the table with them, but he was willing to do what? To be fed. All he wanted was just the crumbs. What fell on the floor? And of course, who does it appear he may have been competing with for those? These dogs. And so, and it makes you wonder if he was there at the gate. It says, did he get inside around the table somehow? Was somebody going to bring him this? Doesn't say that. So he's in bad shape. Dogs licked his sores. So his name means God has helped. And is there some irony there? Because what would probably people say? People, especially let's go back to the first century, what would they say? First of all, they'd look at the wealthy man, and what would they say? God is with him. What would they say about Lazarus? Well, he sinned really bad, or someone in his family sinned really bad. God is not with him, is he? That name has some irony. God has helped, at least in the physical sense. It doesn't appear to be that way. Now, the question to ask. Lazarus. We only find Lazarus in 2 books, 2 places, really. 3 chapters, but two places in the New Testament. One is here, the name Lazarus. Where's the other place? John chapter 11 and 12. Go ahead and jump that, give you that answer, save a little time. And of course, that account deals with what? The resurrection of this guy named Lazarus who had died. He'd been in the tomb 4 days. Okay, he lived in Bethany. He had 2 sisters. What were his sisters' names? Mary and Martha. Okay, so is this the same Lazarus? No. So what clues or what might say, offer evidence? Well, the timing, generally it appears that, I believe in Garvey's fourfold gospel, this account comes before the death and resurrection of Lazarus. And of course, also note that the story saying, what did Jesus say? There was. Meaning, if it's not a parable and a real event, then what does was tell me? It happened in the past. There was a man, and he died. That's not going to be in the future, right? No, there's some. I guess there's a way you could read that, but generally it's happened before. The count happened. If this was a real event, this occurred before the Lazarus of Bethany. What, though, might be some other evidence? Just using common sense or looking at the life situation.
There's no indication that Lazarus, from the rich man and Lazarus came back to life.
There's a good one there. No evidence there. So there's a difference. In fact, based upon what we see, that was not the case. Another thing, and this is not oh boy, this has got him nailed dead to rights, but Lazarus in Bethany had two sisters. We don't know whether they're older, younger, he was in between, we don't know that. But can anybody here in their right mind picture Lazarus walking around with a bunch of bed sores, a cripple, having to go beg at someone else's table? Can you think Martha especially, knowing what we know about Martha? Because remember, when Jesus came to the house, what was Martha doing that time, first time? She was in the kitchen doing what? Cooking. She was going to have a good meal for him. Of course, Mary, we know about that. But I can't believe either. Mary would say, hey, here's our brother. He's a beggar, got a lot of sores. He's got to get to, in order to get fed, he's got to fight the dogs. Can anybody really picture two sisters, especially what we see of Mary and what we see of Martha, allowing that to happen? If that happened, I might know how Lazarus actually died. Martha might have killed him. But yes, Martha, I'm going back up to the rich guy today. The dogs will lick my sores. Don't you worry about that. It just doesn't fit. It just doesn't fit. So these are two distinct individuals. The fact that the way that when the stories take place, how Jesus words it, the actual comparison of the situation of Lazarus, the beggar, with what little we know of Lazarus of Bethany, doesn't really reconcile very well there. And then as Katie points out, there really doesn't appear to be any evidence that Lazarus, this chapter, Luke chapter 16, ever came back or was ever going to be sent back. Because keep in mind, Abraham, will see when we read that, Abraham really says, we're not going to send Lazarus back, are we? And yet, what do we, if Lazarus of Bethany passed away and entered into some place, he was going to have to come back, right? And we don't see that. So there's good evidence there. This is not the same Lazarus. So these two men, extremes, are they not? One appears to be extremely wealthy. The other appears to be extremely poor. And then what happens to both? They both die. And that's where we're going to stop here. We're going to pick up with their deaths next week. Thanks for your attention, your comments. Questions appreciated. Really good class tonight. Again, we're going to cover as much as we can. I want to get through this lesson this month. So we've got 3 more Wednesday nights. Hopefully there won't be any snow or anything like that, or I won't be sick. If I'm sick, I might zoom in. But no, we want to cover this month. Thanks so much.